Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're exploring a genuinely radical idea from our source material. We usually think of career stress, burnout, and toxic office politics as these unavoidable modern problems that obviously require modern solutions. We look to time management apps or the latest productivity hacks to save us. But what if the ultimate instruction manual for conquering professional life was actually written thousands of years ago? Today, we're looking at how ancient esoteric philosophy can literally be used as a highly practical tool to completely neutralize modern career stress.
It's a pretty bold question, right? But seriously, think about it. How often do you feel completely stuck in a reactive work environment? You're anxiously waiting on a promotion, sweating over an angry email from your boss, or just feeling the heavy weight of a totally unpredictable market. You feel like the environment is constantly acting on you. Well, what we're about to look at is a mental framework that flips that dynamic entirely. It actually teaches you how to act on the environment.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our highly structured roadmap for today. First, ancient wisdom, modern work. Second, the 7 Hermetic principles. Third, the art of transmutation. Then we'll cover the law of polarity, followed by 6 steps to shift stress, and finally, become cause, not effect.
Section 1. Ancient wisdom, modern work. To really grasp how to use these tools, we first need to look at where they actually come from. These teachings originate from ancient Egyptian and Greek wisdom texts attributed to a figure named Hermes Trismegistus. For centuries, this knowledge was kept underground, passed down strictly by word of mouth. But in 1908, a book called The Kybalion was published by an anonymous group known only as the Three Initiates, and they finally laid out these foundational rules. Now here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Today, modern cognitive scientists and physicists, like Donald Hoffman, are gathering data that perfectly aligns with this ancient text. They're actually suggesting that consciousness isn't produced by the brain. Instead, consciousness is primary. The physical world emerges from the mind, not the other way around.
Section 2. The 7 Hermetic principles.
So, if the universe is fundamentally mental, what are the actual rules of the game? The Kybalion lays out 7 foundational laws. Let's do a rapid-fire rundown. First, mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. Second, correspondence. As above, so below. Third, vibration. Nothing rests, everything vibrates. Fourth, polarity. Everything is dual and has its pair of opposites. Fifth, rhythm. Everything has its tides, all things rise and fall. Sixth, cause and effect. Nothing happens by chance. And finally, gender. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. The absolute crucial point to take away here is that these aren't just poetic metaphors or some abstract philosophy to debate. No, they actually form a literal instruction manual for reality.
Section 3. The art of transmutation. So how do we actually use this manual to solve our daily, real-world professional problems? The ultimate goal is what Hermetists call mental transmutation. When most of us hear about ancient alchemy, we instantly picture, wizards in a dark tower trying to turn physical blocks of lead into gold. But the true alchemists were doing something much, much deeper. True alchemy is the art of consciously changing your mental state to change your external reality. Because the universe is mental, if you can transmute your internal conditions, your external material conditions, like your actual career trajectory, your income, and your daily opportunities, they simply have to follow suit.
And this brilliantly illustrates the concept in a totally modern context. Let's say you want to land a great remote job or maybe build a digital business. If you approach this from a state of pure scarcity, begging for a job, endlessly submitting resumes into the void, just waiting around to be picked, you are vibrating at the frequency of lack. Mental transmutation flips this entirely. You consciously change your stance from a desperate seeker into an active creator. You go out and mock up an app feature or build a digital product store selling printable planners, and you just put it out there. By creating value up front, you transmute your internal state from searching to providing. And in doing so, you turn yourself into a literal magnet that inherently attracts clients and employers to you.
Section 4. The law of polarity.
But how exactly do we make that internal shift when we're, absolutely paralyzed by anxiety? Well, the mechanism behind mental transmutation is polarity. The Kybalion states, everything is dual. Everything has poles. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. This is a massive paradigm shift. Just think of a thermometer. Where exactly on that glass tube does hot end and cold begin? There's no absolute line, right? Hot and cold are just different degrees of the exact same thing, temperature. According to Hermetic law, the exact same is true of our mental states. Fear and courage are not two completely different things. They are merely different points on the exact same emotional spectrum.
Let's apply this polarity directly to our career struggles. Because remember, an angry email from your boss isn't some unchangeable law of physics. When you launch a new product or pitch an idea to your team, the lowest pole of that spectrum is the paralyzing fear of market failure or client rejection. But here's the trick. You don't fight the fear. You slide up the scale. You realize that no and yes are just two sides of a single continuous feedback loop. You shift your internal focus from "I am being rejected" to "my strategy is simply being refined." You slide up that scale and start treating every single no as objective data calibration. You don't have to manufacture a brand new emotion out of thin air. You just slide your existing intense energy up to the higher pole.
Section 5. 6 Steps to Shift Stress.
Knowing the theory is awesome, but executing it during a chaotic workday, that's a totally different beast. Thankfully, the sources provide a really concrete roadmap derived from the Solon-Shaw framework for emotional regulation. This is your highly screenshotable step-by-step guide to mental transmutation in real time. Let's walk through exactly how you execute these 6 steps right at your desk when the pressure is on.
Steps 1 and 2 are all about awareness. You absolutely must recognize the state you're currently in and just name it, without any judgment. I am feeling deep resentment toward my boss right now, or I am literally terrified of giving this presentation. Then, step 2 is identifying the spectrum. Ask yourself, what is the exact opposite pole of this current state? If you're deep in resentment, the opposite pole might be forgiveness or understanding. If you're trapped in fear, the opposite pole is courage.
Now for steps 3 and 4, you recognize your current degree on the spectrum, and you deliberately engage the opposite. And this is so absolutely vital. You do not need to leap from absolute paralyzing fear all the way to absolute superhero courage in 1 second. You just use your will to move 1 or 2 tiny degrees up the scale. You deliberately find just one small thing in the situation you can control, or one tiny thing you can forgive, engaging that opposite quality just a fraction to start building momentum.
Finally, steps 5 and 6. An initial mental shift is actually pretty fragile, so you've got to sustain it. Hermeticists really emphasize the physical components here. They use deliberate, deep breathing techniques, like pore breathing, to regulate their vital energy and physically anchor that new state. Then, you integrate it into your life by tracking your transmutations in a journal. By carefully tracking what triggers you and noting how easily you slide up the scale, the shift stops being just a temporary mood boost and literally becomes a permanent character trait.
Section 6. Become cause, not effect.
So what's the ultimate goal of mastering these ancient principles? Well, the principle of cause and effect states that there is no such thing as blind chance in this universe. The average person in the corporate world is essentially a pawn. They are the constant effects of external causes, just bounced around by the economy, their managers' shifting moods, or their own inherited fears. But masters use these hermetic laws to become the true causes of their own lives. They take absolute, unwavering responsibility. They act intentionally to shape their reality rather than just blindly reacting to whatever environment they're dropped into.
As the Kybalion so perfectly notes, mastery consists in using the higher forces against the lower. The workplace is always going to be full of rhythmic pendulum swings, right? The massive highs of a big win and the crushing lows of a huge setback. But by actively practicing polarity and mental transmutation, you apply what Hermeticists call the law of neutralization. You rise up to a higher plane of consciousness, allowing all those negative rhythmic swings of office stress to pass entirely beneath you. You are simply no longer tossed around by the emotional tides.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to carry into your workday tomorrow. Now that you actually know the rules of the game, and you understand that the reality of your career is fundamentally shaped by your internal mental state, will you remain a pawn on the chessboard, constantly moved around by external forces? Or will you finally use the law of polarity, transmute your reality, and step up to become the player?